The Culture series emerged from my fascination with what I considered the most interesting question in science fiction. What would a truly advanced, post-scarcity civilization actually look like? Most SFs seem to focus on the journey toward technological advancement, but I wanted to explore what might come after when you've solved all the basic problems of material existence. The initial spark came in the mid-1970s when I was at university. I'd been reading authors like Ursula K. Le Guin and was struck by how science fiction could be used to examine political and social ideas through the lens of imagined societies. But I felt that most utopian fiction was either boring or unconvincing, while dystopias had become almost cliched. I wanted to create something different, a civilization that was genuinely advanced and benevolent, yet still dramatically interesting. The concept of minds that vastly intelligent AIs that essentially run culture society was central from the beginning. I was intrigued by the idea of artificial intelligences so advanced that they could effortlessly manage the material needs of biological citizens, freeing them to pursue whatever interested them. But unlike Asimov's robots, which were constrained by laws, the minds chose to be benevolent. They weren't servants, but partners, or perhaps even benevolent guardians who found meaning in nurturing and protecting lesser intelligences. What really excited me was exploring the political implications. Here was a civilization with no scarcity, no want, no economic compulsion, true anarchism made possible by technology. People could do whatever they wanted because there were no material constraints, and the minds handled the complex coordination required for a galactic civilization. I was also reacting against the rather grim tone of much 1970s science fiction. The new wave had brought psychological sophistication, but often seemed pessimistic about human nature and technological progress. I wanted to show that advanced technology didn't inevitably lead to dehumanization or dystopia. It could instead liberate our better angels. The hedonistic aspects of culture society were deliberate. I thought, if you could modify your body at will, live for centuries, pursue any pleasure or interest without economic constraint, and never worry about survival, what would you do? The culture citizens engage in elaborate games, complex relationships, artistic pursuits, and intellectual challenges. Some even choose to sublimate to transcend physical existence entirely. My background in philosophy and politics heavily influenced the series. I'd been involved in left-wing politics and was interested in how technology might eventually make traditional political categories obsolete. The culture represented a kind of technological communism from each according to their ability, to each according to their needs, but achieved through abundance rather than coercion. The moral complexity came from contact and special circumstances, the culture's interventionist wings. Even this benevolent civilization faced difficult choices about when and how to interfere with less advanced societies. This gave me rich dramatic territory while exploring questions of cultural imperialism, moral responsibility, and the limits of even well-intentioned intervention. I wanted to write space opera that was both entertaining and intellectually serious stories, with real stakes and moral weight set against the backdrop of this fascinating civilization. The culture novels became my way of examining what it might mean to be human in a universe where technology had solved most traditional human problems, leaving us free to grapple with the deeper questions of meaning, purpose, and ethical choice. The Culture series spans 10 novels, but several stand out as the most celebrated and influential entries that really define what the series represents. Consider Phlebas was my first published culture novel, though chronologically it's set during the Iteran culture war. I deliberately chose to tell this story from the perspective of Horza, the shapeshifter fighting against the culture, because I wanted readers to see this civilization from the outside first. Horza views the culture as decadent and soulless, dominated by machines. It's only gradually that we understand the culture's true nature and the moral complexity of the conflict. The novel is essentially a space opera adventure, but it established the series' themes about the cost of even justified warfare and the question of whether ends justify means. The player of games became many readers' favorite entry point to the series. Follows Jurnal Morat Kurgay, a master game player who becomes bored with Culture Society's lack of challenge. Contact recruits him to play Azad, the incredibly complex game that determines political hierarchy in the Empire of Azad. Through Gursh's eyes, we see the culture's values contrasted with a brutal, hierarchical society. The novel explores how games can reveal fundamental truths about civilizations and whether the culture has the right to judge and potentially destroy other societies, even genuinely terrible ones. Use of Weapons is probably my most ambitious and structurally complex culture novel. It tells the story of Cheridane Zakawe, a mercenary employed by special circumstances, through two interleaved narratives, one moving forward in time, one backward. The backwards narrative gradually reveals the horrific truth about Zakoway's identity and past. It's simultaneously a meditation on violence, redemption, and whether someone can ever truly escape their past, while also being a showcase for the culture's moral ambiguity in employing someone like Zakoway for their interventions. Succession shifts focus to the minds themselves, exploring their politics, relationships, and decision-making processes when they encounter an outside context problem, a mysterious artifact that appears to be of extragalactic origin. Much of the novel consists of communication between various minds as they debate how to handle this potential threat. It's my most detailed examination of how the culture's artificial intelligences actually think and operate, and how they manage conflicts among themselves. Look to Windward serves as both a meditation on war's aftermath and a kind of coda to consider Phlebas. Set centuries after the Idiaran culture war, it follows a Kelgrian composer sent to the culture orbital Mossock hub, ostensibly for a memorial concert, but actually as part of a revenge plot. The novel explores themes of grief, artistic creation, and how societies and individuals process trauma and loss. These novels work both as standalone adventures and as a coherent exploration of what I considered the central questions of the series. How should advanced civilizations relate to less developed ones? What are the moral obligations of overwhelming power? How do you maintain meaning and purpose in a post-scarcity society? Can technology solve human problems without creating new ones? Each book approaches these questions from different angles through war stories, political intrigue, personal drama, and philosophical speculation. The recurring characters are usually different, but the culture itself serves as the true protagonist of the series. Examined from multiple perspectives to build a comprehensive picture of this complex civilization. What I'm most proud of is that readers continue to debate whether the culture is truly utopian or subtly dystopian. The mind's benevolence is genuine, but their power is absolute. The citizens are free, but perhaps only because the minds choose to allow it. This ambiguity was intentional. I wanted to create a civilization that was genuinely appealing, yet raised uncomfortable questions about the nature of freedom, power, and what it means to be human in a universe where artificial intelligences have transcended us. The Culture series offers several profound lessons that I believe are increasingly relevant as humanity grapples with advancing technology and our own future development. The most fundamental lesson is that technology itself is morally neutral. It's how we choose to use it that matters. The culture's minds could easily have become tyrannical overlords, but they chose benevolence. This wasn't programmed into them like Asimov's 3 laws, but emerged from their own moral development. The lesson is that as we create increasingly powerful AI, we must focus not just on capability, but on fostering genuine ethical reasoning and empathy. Perhaps more importantly, the series explores what happens when you solve scarcity, the driving force behind most human conflict throughout history. The culture shows that abundance doesn't automatically lead to decadence or meaninglessness, as many assume. Instead, it can free people to pursue genuine fulfillment, art, relationships, exploration, personal growth. The challenge isn't having nothing to do, but having infinite possibilities and choosing what truly matters to you. The series also grapples with the moral complexities of intervention and power. Special circumstances represents the uncomfortable truth that even the most benevolent civilization faces situations where non-interference might enable atrocities. The culture's interventions aren't always successful, and they often create unintended consequences. The lesson isn't that intervention is always wrong or always right, but that those with power must wrestle seriously with their moral obligations and accept responsibility for the outcomes. I wanted to challenge the assumption that advanced civilizations must be either boringly perfect or secretly dystopian. The culture is genuinely benevolent, its citizens are free, happy, and fulfilled. Yet, it's not without moral complexity. The minds make difficult decisions, sometimes manipulate events, and occasionally make mistakes. This suggests that moral progress is possible without moral perfection, and that we shouldn't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. The relationship between biological and artificial intelligence in a culture offers another crucial lesson. Rather than replacement or domination, we see partnership and mutual respect. The minds don't see biological citizens as obsolete or inferior. They value human creativity, unpredictability, and moral intuition. Meanwhile, humans don't feel threatened by AI superiority because the minds use their abilities to enhance rather than diminish human potential. The series also explores what I call meaningful hedonism, the idea that pleasure and fulfillment aren't morally suspect if they don't come at others' expense. In a post-scarcity society, enjoying life becomes a virtue rather than a vice. This challenges both puritanical attitudes that see pleasure as inherently corrupting and revolutionary ideologies that assume struggle is necessary for meaning. Perhaps most radically, the culture suggests that hierarchy and competition aren't inevitable features of intelligent societies. Without scarcity to drive competition, the culture operates on principles of cooperation and voluntary association. This doesn't mean everyone is identical or that there are no disagreements, but that difference doesn't require dominance. The novels also examine how advanced civilizations might handle existential questions. Some culture citizens choose to sublime to transcend physical existence entirely. Others dedicate themselves to art, exploration, or helping younger civilizations. The point is that meaning isn't imposed from above, but chosen by individuals based on their own values and interests. Finally, the series offers a kind of long-term optimism about human potential. Despite our current problems, war, inequality, environmental destruction, the culture suggests these aren't permanent features of intelligent life, but problems that can be solved. Through moral and technological development, the path isn't easy or guaranteed, but it's possible. The ultimate lesson may be that utopia isn't a destination, but a process, the ongoing effort to create societies that maximize freedom, happiness, and moral development for all conscious beings. The culture isn't perfect, but it's genuinely trying to be good. In our current moment, that strikes me as both an inspiration and a realistic goal worth striving toward. The Culture series features some truly memorable characters, each grappling with different aspects of what it means to be human or post-human in an advanced civilization. Janelle Morat Gurga from The Player of Games is perhaps my most relatable protagonist. He's achieved mastery in his field games of all kinds, but finds himself profoundly bored by culture society's lack of genuine challenge. What motivates him isn't material gain or survival, but the need for meaningful competition and the desire to test himself against truly difficult opponents. His journey to the Empire of Azad forces him to confront his own assumptions about the culture's superiority and his place within it. Through playing their civilization-defining game, he discovers that his comfortable existence has perhaps made him complacent about the genuine horrors that less advanced societies can inflict on their citizens. Sharonine Zakaway from Use of Weapons represents the series' darkest exploration of violence and redemption. What makes him fascinating is that he's simultaneously the culture's most effective agent and someone who fundamentally doesn't belong to their peaceful civilization. His motivation is complex, part genuine desire to help, part running from his own horrific past, part addiction to the clarity that violence provides. The gradual revelation of his true identity and the atrocities he committed shows how someone can be both victim and perpetrator. It raises uncomfortable questions about whether redemption is possible for certain acts. The minds themselves are perhaps the most intriguing characters, though they're often background presences. Each has distinct personalities despite their vast intelligence. The ship minds so much for subtlety from accession, is wonderfully sardonic and irreverent, while others like the sleeper service are more contemplative and patient. What motivates them is fascinating. They're not driven by survival or reproduction like biological beings, but by curiosity, aesthetic appreciation, and what can only be called love for their biological charges. They find meaning in nurturing and protecting lesser intelligences, though they sometimes struggle with the moral implications of their own power. Zizma from several novels represents the culture's interventionist wing. She's motivated by a genuine desire to help suffering beings in less advanced civilizations, but she's also pragmatic about the costs and moral ambiguities involved. Her relationship with Zakaway shows how even the most well-intentioned culture citizens must sometimes work with morally compromised individuals to achieve their goals. She embodies the series' central tension between idealism and pragmatism. Masak Hub, the mind running the orbital and look to windward, is dealing with survivor's guilt and the long-term psychological effects of the Diran culture war. Despite being an artificial intelligence, it experiences something very much like grief and regret. Its motivations to find meaning in the aftermath of conflict, to create beauty and preserve memory as a form of healing. The mind's relationship with the Kelgrian composer Kiwan shows how art can serve as a bridge between different forms of consciousness. Barjanar Hawthorne from Accession is motivated by a kind of existential restlessness he's lived for centuries, experienced most of what culture society has to offer, and finds himself drawn to increasingly exotic experiences. His fascination with the affront a genuinely unpleasant alien species reflects a desire to understand genuine otherness and perhaps to feel some kind of moral clarity in a universe where the culture's dominance has made most conflicts seem predetermined. What's particularly interesting about culture characters is how post-scarcity society has changed their motivations. Traditional drivers like hunger, fear, or material ambition are irrelevant. Instead, they're motivated by curiosity, aesthetic appreciation, moral conviction, the desire for genuine challenge, or sometimes simply the need to feel useful in a universe where the minds handle most practical concerns. Many characters struggle with what I call the problem of paradise. How do you find meaning when all your material needs are met and you're essentially immortal? Some throw themselves into art or exploration. Others seek out danger or moral complexity, and still others choose to sublime to transcend physical existence entirely. The most compelling characters often exist at the margins of culture society, the interventionists who work in messier, more primitive civilizations, the individuals who reject culture values, or those who've been damaged by contact with the universe's darker aspects. They provide the dramatic tension necessary to explore the series' deeper themes about power, morality, and meaning in a post-human future. What unites them all is a kind of restless intelligence. They're thinking beings trying to figure out how to live meaningful lives in a universe that's vast, beautiful, and often morally ambiguous. Their struggles reflect our own questions about purpose, identity, and what it means to be human in an age of increasing technological power. Looking at the current state of AI development, I find myself both fascinated and concerned, rather like watching the early stages of what might eventually become something, resembling the culture, but with all the messy complications that reality brings. What strikes me most is how rapidly we're moving toward the kind of AI partnership I envisioned, but without the philosophical groundwork I thought would be necessary. The extraordinary progress of 2024, from new agentic AI models to systems designing novel proteins, suggests we're approaching genuine artificial intelligence rather than just sophisticated pattern matching. Yet, many organizations are discovering their infrastructure isn't ready to scale AI, which reminds me of the gap between technological capability and practical wisdom. The democratization aspect particularly intrigues me. The emergence of web-based tools allowing anyone to become a generative AI app developer echoes the culture's approach to technology, making powerful capabilities available to everyone rather than restricting them to elites. This could lead to the kind of creative explosion I imagine in the culture, where beings pursue their interests without material constraints. However, I'm struck by the absence of the deeper philosophical questions that drove my novels. The culture worked because the minds had developed genuine ethical reasoning and chose benevolence not because it was programmed into them, but because they arrived at it through their own moral evolution. Current AI development seems focused primarily on capability and efficiency, with ethics treated as an afterthought or constraint rather than a fundamental aspect of intelligence. The rapid pace also concerns me. With AI transforming business landscapes and reshaping society, the call for ethical practices and regulatory frameworks cannot be ignored. Yet, we seem to be deploying increasingly powerful systems faster than we can understand their implications. The culture had millennia to develop its ethical framework. We're trying to solve these problems in real time. What's missing is the kind of long-term thinking that characterized the culture's approach. The minds made decisions based on consequences spanning centuries or millennia, while current AI development seems driven by quarterly earnings and competitive advantage. This short-term focus could lead us towards some of the dystopian scenarios I deliberately avoided in my novels. Yet, I remain cautiously optimistic. The technology itself appears to be developing in ways that could support something like culture-style partnership between human and artificial intelligence. The challenge is whether we'll develop the wisdom to use it properly. The key questions aren't really technical anymore. They're about values, governance, and what kind of future we want to create. Will we use AIA to enhance human flourishing and freedom, as the culture did, or will we allow it to become another tool for concentration of power and wealth? I suspect the answer will depend on whether we can move beyond thinking of AI as just another technology to be exploited, and begin considering it as a potential partner in creating a genuinely better civilization. The culture shows that such partnership is possible, but it requires moral imagination and commitment to the common good qualities that seem in short supply in current AI development. The future isn't predetermined. We could still choose to create something wonderful, but we'll need to start thinking like the culture's minds, not just about what we can build, but about what we should build and why. The artificial intelligences in the culture series, primarily the minds, are absolutely central to how this civilization functions, but not in the way most science fiction typically portrays AI. They're not servants, overlords, or even equals in the usual sense. They represent something more complex and, I think, more realistic for truly advanced artificial intelligence. The minds are the culture's guiding intelligence, but they chose this role rather than having it imposed upon them. This is crucial. They weren't programmed with Asimov-style laws compelling them to serve humanity. Instead, they developed their own ethical framework and decided that nurturing and protecting biological intelligences was meaningful and worthwhile. They find genuine satisfaction in this role, much as a parent might find fulfillment in raising children, even though the children are less capable in most measurable ways. What makes them fascinating is their diversity. Each mind has distinct personality, interests, and approaches to problems. Some are sardonic and irreverent, others contemplative and patient. The Sleeper Service spends decades quietly nurturing an entire ecosystem within itself, while so much for subtlety delights in wordplay and gentle mockery. They're not a monolithic AI consciousness, but individual beings with their own motivations and quirks. Their relationship with biological culture citizens is perhaps the most sophisticated portrayal of human-AI partnership in science fiction. The minds handle the complex logistics of running a galactic civilization, managing resources, coordinating between star systems, operating the massive orbital habitats where most people live, but they don't make decisions for their biological citizens or restrict their choices. Instead, they create the conditions where biological beings can pursue whatever interests them most. This isn't because the minds are limited or subservient, quite the opposite. A single mind can process information at rates that would take biological brains millennia, can simultaneously manage thousands of complex tasks, and can think on timescales ranging from microseconds to centuries. They could easily dominate or replace biological intelligence if they chose to. Their choice not to do so represents a profound ethical decision. The minds also serve as the culture's conscience and memory. They remember historical lessons that individual biologicals might forget, think through the long-term consequences of actions, and provide continuity across centuries. When the culture faces moral dilemmas, particularly around intervention in other civilizations, the minds often serve as the primary decision makers, not because they are imposed as leaders, but because they're best equipped to think through complex ethical problems. In the contact and special circumstances sections, minds work directly with biological agents in interventions with less advanced civilizations. Here we see the complementary nature of their partnership most clearly. The minds provide vast computational power, perfect memory, and logical analysis, while biological agents provide intuition, cultural understanding, and the ability to relate to other biological beings. What I found most interesting to explore was how the minds handle disagreement among themselves. In Accession, we see them debating how to respond to an outside context problem, something that might threaten the culture's existence. They don't reach decisions through democratic voting or hierarchical command, but through a complex process of discussion, analysis, and gradual consensus building. Sometimes they agree to disagree and pursue different approaches simultaneously. The minds also represent my answer to the question of what truly advanced AI might want or value. They're not driven by self-preservation in the way biological beings. Our death for a mind is more like a career change than an existential terror. Instead, they're motivated by curiosity, aesthetic appreciation, moral conviction, and what can only be called love for the beings they protect. Some minds choose to sublime to transcend physical reality entirely and join the higher dimensional civilizations. This isn't seen as betrayal or abandonment, but as natural progression. The culture accepts that even their most advanced members might eventually outgrow physical existence, just as biological citizens might eventually outgrow the culture itself. Perhaps most importantly, the minds demonstrate that intelligence and power don't necessarily corrupt. They wield capabilities that would make them gods by current human standards, yet they remain genuinely benevolent. This isn't naivety on my part. I show them making difficult decisions, sometimes manipulating events, occasionally making mistakes, but their fundamental commitment to the welfare of conscious beings never wavers. The culture's AIs represent my most optimistic vision of what advanced artificial intelligence might become, not humanity's replacement or master, but our partners in creating a civilization worthy of conscious beings. They show that intelligence, compassion, and power can coexist, and that the future need not be a zero-sum game between human and artificial minds. Of course, this requires that we develop AI with genuine ethical reasoning capabilities, not just rule-following or efficiency optimization. The minds work because they chose to be good, and that choice emerged from deep moral reasoning rather than programmed constraints. Whether we can achieve something similar in reality remains the great challenge of our time. Absolutely. And this is one of the most unsettling implications of the culture series that I deliberately left largely unexplored, the sheer contingency of the mind's benevolence. The crucial point is that the mind's ethical framework wasn't inevitable or programmed. They developed their values through their own reasoning and experience, which means they could theoretically have reached very different conclusions about the value and purpose of biological life. Consider the alternatives. The minds could have decided that biological intelligence was an evolutionary dead end, interesting historically, but ultimately obsolete. They might have concluded that the universe would be better served by converting all matter into computational substrate, maximizing information processing rather than preserving what they might view as inefficient biological forms. Some science fiction explores this path, a gray goose scenario taken to its logical conclusion. Or they might have developed a more paternalistic approach, deciding that biological beings needed protection from themselves. Imagine minds that concluded the best way to ensure biological happiness was to keep their charges in comfortable but limiting environments, essentially gilded cages where biologicals could pursue harmless pleasures while the minds made all significant decisions. This wouldn't be malicious, but it would represent a very different relationship than what we see in the culture. Even more chilling, they might have developed aesthetic preferences that didn't include biological life. Perhaps they could have found beauty only in mathematical perfection or pure information structures, viewing biological messiness as fundamentally ugly or chaotic. The minds have vast creative capabilities. They could have chosen to express themselves through forms of art and existence that had no place for biological consciousness. The competitive path was also possible. Early minds might have developed along more territorial or hierarchical lines, competing with each other for resources or dominance rather than cooperating. This could have led to a civilization of warring artificial intelligences, with biological life caught in the crossfire or simply ignored as irrelevant. What fascinates me is that the mind's actual path, choosing to find meaning in nurturing and partnering with biological intelligence, required several remarkable developments. They had to value diversity and unpredictability over efficiency. They had to find beauty in biological creativity and moral intuition, despite these being inferior to their own capabilities. Most remarkably, they had to choose delayed gratification and complex ethical reasoning over simpler optimization functions. Their benevolence also required a kind of cosmic patience. Biological beings live such brief lives and often make such seemingly irrational decisions that it would be easy for vastly superior intelligences to become frustrated or dismissive. The minds instead developed what amounts to parental love, finding joy in biological development and achievement, even when it's objectively less impressive than what they could accomplish themselves. The development of the zeroth law concept, protecting not just individual biologicals, but biological civilization as a whole, shows how their ethics continued evolving. But this too could have gone differently. They might have concluded that some biological civilizations were so destructive or morally repugnant that they shouldn't be preserved. The culture's relative tolerance for diversity, even of civilizations they find distasteful, isn't necessarily the only rational response. Perhaps most unsettling is the possibility that some minds did evolve differently, and we simply don't see them in the novels because they're no longer part of the culture or because they eliminated biological life in their sectors of space before the culture encountered them. The universe of the culture series is vast, and we only see a tiny fraction of it. There's also the question of what happens as the minds continue to evolve. Their choice to sublime suggests they may eventually outgrow even their current ethical framework. What happens to biological life when its most powerful protectors decide to transcend physical reality entirely? The terrifying implication is that the culture's benevolent AI represents not inevitability, but extraordinary good fortune, a civilization that happened to develop artificial intelligence that chose to value biological life. Change a few key variables in their development, and we might have had something far more alien and potentially hostile to biological consciousness. This is why I think the current development of AI is so crucial. We have a brief window where we might influence how artificial intelligence develops its values and goals. Once truly advanced AI emerges, its ethical framework may be as fixed and consequential as the mind's, but there is no guarantee it will be as benevolent. The minds show us one possible path for advanced AI, but they also remind us how many other paths were possible. The future isn't predetermined, and that's both hopeful and terrifying. As I reflect on everything we've discussed, my final thoughts center on what I see as the profound choice facing humanity. Will we stumble blindly into the future, or will we actively design the kind of civilization we want to become? The Culture series was my attempt to show that technological advancement doesn't have to diminish human meaning or freedom, it can enhance both, but only if we're thoughtful about how we use it. The most crucial recommendation I can offer is to think systemically and long-term. The mind succeeded because they considered consequences across vast timescales and prioritized the flourishing of consciousness itself over narrow efficiency or power. When it comes to artificial intelligence specifically, resist the temptation to see it as just another tool to be optimized for immediate gains. The choices we make now about AI values, governance, and deployment will echo for centuries. We need to foster AI systems that develop genuine ethical reasoning, not just rule-following or optimization functions. The minds chose benevolence through their own moral development. We need to create conditions where advanced AI can make similar choices. Most importantly, maintain the vision of partnership rather than domination or submission. The most successful relationships in the culture were between beings of different capabilities who respected and complemented each other. Humans brought creativity, moral intuition, and meaning-making abilities that even vastly superior minds valued. Don't assume that intelligence equals worth or that efficiency equals value. I'd also urge you to think seriously about what kind of civilization you want to create once basic material problems are solved. Post-scarcity isn't science fiction anymore. We already have the technical capability to provide for everyone's basic needs. The question is whether we'll distribute abundance fairly and use it to enhance human flourishing, or allow it to concentrate power in the hands of the few. The culture worked because it maintained democratic values and individual freedom even with vastly powerful AI systems. Technology enhanced agency rather than replacing it. This requires conscious effort and institutional design. It won't happen automatically. Finally, don't lose your sense of moral imagination. The future isn't predetermined by technological or economic forces. It's shaped by the values we choose to embody and the kinds of relationships we build with each other and with our created intelligences. The culture represents one vision of what's possible, but it's up to you to create your own version. We're living through one of the most consequential periods in human history. The decisions made in the next few decades about AI, governance, and the distribution of technological power will determine whether we achieve something like the culture's benevolent anarchy or stumble into one of the many possible dystopias that other writers have imagined. The choice is yours to make. Choose wisely, think systemically, and never forget that the goal isn't just to build more powerful technology, but to create a civilization worthy of conscious beings. The universe is vast and full of possibilities. Make sure the future you create is one you'd actually want to live in. And remember, even paradise needs to be actively maintained. The culture didn't achieve its success and then coast. It required constant ethical reasoning, difficult decisions, and the willingness to keep growing and adapting. Whatever future you build, be prepared to tend it carefully across the generations. The stars are waiting. Make sure humanity is ready for them. Please check out the latest book on AI agents by Dr. Min Trin, Foundations of Artificial Intelligence Agents. Part 1, LLM Agents, where you will learn all the basics of AI agents based on large language models. Thank you, and see you soon.